Why Korea has the highest suicide rate in the world? Um, I think it's because there's not a lot of talk about mental health, and they have there's such like an emphasis on like studying and schooling and like getting the right job and doing all that stuff. It might also be like the different generations as well.
Is South Korea the world's suicide capital? In
Maybe.
February of 2025, actress Kim Se-ron died by suicide. Another reminder that suicide in the country isn't random, it's a pattern. I'm John, a PhD sociologist who taught 5 years in Korea, and in this video, I'll show why a nation famous for K-pop, K-drama, and tech leads the developed world in
Oh
suicides,
my
and
gosh.
what's actually underneath. It isn't only student stress. Stay
Oh.
with me because in a minute you'll see the one social shift that almost no one talks about. I'll connect the data, the history, and the human stories so that the headlines finally make sense. Now, I want to be upfront about this video's topic. It's hard to talk about. As a
Mhm.
sociologist, my job here is to unpack what's driving this crisis as clearly and as honestly as I can, so we can all understand it a little better. But before we go further, I want to acknowledge the pain and surrounding suicide. This isn't just about statistics and deep societal distress. For some of you, this topic may hit too close to home, and my goal is to approach it with as much sensitivity and respect as possible.
The numbers don't lie. Korea's deadly
South Korea has the
statistics.
highest suicide rate of any developed nation. In 2024 alone, more than 14,000 people took their own lives. That works out to about 28.3 people per 100,000.
Oh, United States. Wait, what line is that? 14.6? My
Or one
goodness.
person every 37 minutes. That's the highest since
Every 37 minutes?
2013. Now, when most people hear about Korea's suicide crisis, they think of struggling students. And yes,
Oh, that's what I
youth
thought.
suicides are heartbreaking, but the truth is, this crisis doesn't belong to just one generation. It cuts across the entire society. Take the elderly. Over 40% of seniors in South Korea live below the poverty line. In Seoul, you'll see old men and women hunched over carts of
Oh,
cardboard, collecting scraps to earn maybe $10 a day. These are the same people who built Korea after the war, now living out their final years in tiny apartments with children who might stop by maybe once or twice a year. Tradition says respect your elders, but reality leaves them invisible, isolated, and broke.
우리 막내딸은 나한테 안 온 지가 2년 됐어요. 이거
two
한다고 안
years?
와. 엄마가 거지냐고. 거지 아니어도 내가 너네들한테 괴로움 안 치고 내가 조금 사는 날까지 조금 이렇게 활동하려고 그런다 하니까 이제는 이해가 가나 봐.
And then there's the youth. Back when I was teaching in Korea from '07 to 2012, I'd see students stumble into class exhausted, sometimes downing 4 cans of Monster a day just to stay awake during exam season.
Oh
There are
my
days
goodness. When I went to Japan, and I went to school, and then I wasn't actually like in the classes. There's sometimes I'd be in the classes, but most of the time we'd all like meet at school in like a room, and then we'd like get on a bus and go somewhere else. So I wasn't like actually like with my host student like the whole time, but we had to take the train to and from school, and coming back from like school, there would just be students just like slumped over, just really tired. I mean, my host student was just always tired. And then we'd come home and she'd have to do like a lot of work and stuff. So
often ran from early
it's
morning
yeah.
school straight into Hagwons, the private cram schools that make up a $20 billion industry,
Yeah.
drilling kids in math, English, and test prep until near midnight. The weight of expectations from family, from teachers, and even from themselves creates a pressure cooker
Yeah,
where
it's very
every exam feels
stressful.
like it could decide their entire future. For
Very
some, one
stressful.
bad grade doesn't just sting, it feels like a permanent mark that could derail the path their whole family has invested in. With that kind of weight pressing down day after day, it's no wonder so many students live in a constant state of exhaustion and quiet panic. Now here's the hard truth. Suicide is now the leading cause of death for South Koreans between the ages of 10 and 39. To put it in
10?
perspective, Korea's youth suicide rate is not just higher than the OECD average, it's roughly double it,
Oh my
making
gosh.
Korean teens some of the most at risk in the developed world. If we look closer at adults, the gender split tells a clear story. In 2024, men made up over 10,000 suicides, while women accounted for just over 4,000. Men are more likely to die, but women are more likely to attempt and seek help. It's not one crisis, but two. One's more lethal and one's more frequent, playing out in different ways under the same roof. South Korea is one of the world's most densely populated countries, with about 529 people per square kilometer. Cities like Seoul, Busan, and Daegu pull in the youth, leaving villages full of Asian parents with no support. Meanwhile, millions in urban towers live side by side without ever learning their neighbor's name. Whether it's loneliness in the high-rise or abandonment in the countryside, isolation does take its toll. That's why this crisis doesn't just belong to one group. Women face stigma if they put their career before marriage, marry late, or divorce. And on top of that, they're pushed by relentless beauty standards.
Oh my
South
God,
Korea
yeah.
has the highest
Yeah.
plastic surgery rates in the world.
I mean, people go to Korea just to get specific plastic surgery. Like it's, like people like fly out and just get plastic surgery over
schools
there.
I taught at, it's even well known that some girls will receive plastic surgery as a graduation gift from their parents.
Whoa!
Meanwhile, men quietly disappear, trapped by Korean-style Confucian stoicism. They're taught to swallow their pain, avoid seeking help, and measure their worth by providing for their family in a capitalist system that feels rigged to keep everyone but the rich in their place. No corner of society is spared. Korea's suicide crisis doesn't just target one group, it adapts, like a virus, exploiting whatever weakness each group carries.
Interesting.
And that's why this isn't just about numbers. These are symptoms of something deeper. A society that rocketed into modernity so fast it left millions without the social anchors that once held communities together.
Oh my God.
But before we move on, a quick plug that if you want more cultural deep dives like this, make sure to like and subscribe.
Oh, I thought he was gonna do an ad. When society breaks apart.
More than 100 years ago, French sociologist Émile Durkheim coined a term for what happens when society changes too fast, anomie. It describes a state of normlessness, which is when the old rules vanish, but new rules haven't really formed yet, leaving people feeling adrift without guidance. Durkheim even outlined 4 types of suicide, and one of them, anomic suicide, happens when this breakdown of social norms makes life feel unstable and meaningless. And that lines up with what we're seeing in South Korea today. Just think about Korea's transformation. In only a few decades, the country shifted from rural farming villages to some of the world's largest megacities. In the past, Korean villages worked like built-in social safety nets. Everyone knew their
Knew each
neighbors
other
at all
and
stages of life. With
communicated.
the move to the city, big extended families with cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, all under one roof collapsed into small 3 or 4 person households. Modernization happened at a breakneck speed, leaving people with a lack of social support, which is essential for mental health. The signs of anomie is everywhere in Korea. Roles that once gave people identity, like the dutiful son, the respected elder, or the community leader, collapsed faster than new ones could take their place. Elders lost their role as keepers of wisdom as traditional hierarchies were replaced by corporate ladders, while young people faced life-defining choices without clear guidance from tradition in a brave new world.
I am so utterly and completely confused.
Compared to Western countries that had centuries for their social fabric to stretch and adapt to modernize, Korea went through the same process in just a few decades.
Whoa.
The result wasn't a gentle shift, it was a tear. And out of that tear, a new set of pressures emerged. Education became hyper-competitive because when things are uncertain, the best way to feel certain, get
Switch,
respect,
switch.
and to be hired
Keep
for a
going
good
up.
job is to get credentials. Work turned cold and brutal because climbing the corporate ladder replaced honoring the family name. And social media poured fuel on that fire, amplifying isolation and comparison with keeping up with the Lees and Kims. Traditional support systems collapsed, but the new ones weren't ready, leaving millions of people feeling afloat in a society they barely recognized. Durkheim's concept of normlessness gives us a powerful lens. When change outpaces human adaptation, suicide risk rises. And in Korea, this loss of social anchors collided with something even heavier. A culture where personal failure doesn't just shame the individual, it stains the entire
Shames the
group.
whole family. The weight of ancestors.
In medieval Korea, education was seen as a way to get out of poverty. Entire villages would pool resources to
Stop
back a
using
single
AI,
candidate
bro.
for the gwakyo, the old civil service exam. Every family sacrifices, sending the village's single brightest kid to study the Confucian classics, while the other kids work the rice paddies. If he
Oh.
passes, he'll become a government official and the whole community shares in the glory and will profit from the official trickling down benefits from his position. But if he
Interesting.
fails, it wasn't just his loss. It was a collective shame and he was to blame because he was the chosen one.
You were the chosen one!
That's why the
You were
Korean
supposed to
phrase
bring balance to
"묘목이
the
없다,"
force.
no face, can mean more than embarrassment, to the extent of being kind of a social death. Records show that some scholars took their own lives after failing the civil service exams.
Oh.
They weren't just crushed by personal disappointment, they felt the unbearable weight of betraying everyone who had sacrificed for them. And hauntingly, this pattern towards education hasn't really disappeared, it just evolved.
시간을 더 줄여가지고 짬나.
I eat more quickly to reduce the amount of time spent on meals so that I can use it to study more or
Whoa.
memorize words.
하루에 평가받는 게 조금
It's an incredible amount of pressure to have everything depend on your performance on one day, but I think it's an inevitable reality.
봐요.
Oh.
Today, every November, the Sunong puts the whole country at a standstill. It's an 8-hour marathon of back-to-back exams for high school students. Seoul falls silent on exam day. Shops shut, banks close, and the stock
Dang.
market opens late. Construction stops, and planes are grounded, and even the military drills pause. The
What?
silence breaks only for sirens. Police racing late students through traffic under an actual government policy that treats exam day like a national
Oh my
operation. Because if
God,
you
that's
miss the start, the
insane.
doors lock, and this one slip up could screw up your entire future. Meanwhile, anxious parents crowd temples and churches, clutching photos of their children, bowing and praying in sync
Praying
with
for
the
their
exam
kids.
schedule. Officially, student scores are posted on a national website about a month after the exam, but unofficial sites leak the results almost right away, letting students instantly compare their score to the cutoff of their dream university. You also see how you stack against others. And of course, comparison is the thief of joy. And how you score on it dictates not only whether you will go to university, but can affect your job prospects and income, which in
Job
turn determines
too?
where you'll live and even future
Oh,
relationships.
jeez.
It can literally feel like you and your family's fate hangs
For just one day, one exam. What if you do like really, really bad? Can you retake it? Or is it just like you?
on this
Bro.
one single test.
Oh, that's
All right, now
insane.
forgive my Korean because it's not that great. But the old philosophy of 고생고때 낙이 온다, which stands for bitter living for joy at the end, still drives a culture of sacrifice, with the promise of success someday making the suffering worthwhile. Families pour everything into their children's education, spending heavily on school and hagwon tuition, betting on admission to the big three sky universities or Western elite schools. Raising a kid is super expensive, which helps explain the low birth rates in the country. And you don't get to escape this fate even if you step out of the Korean system, since there will be English requirements,
I
which
love that
means
video.
more private schools or hagwons and SATs for Western universities. Back when
Yeah.
I was teaching at an elite international school in South Korea, where they paid 30 grand USD a year just to attend school, and that's before boarding, I
Yeah.
saw this attitude firsthand. I'll never forget the story where one student opened a rejection letter from Princeton in class, and the second he realized he didn't get in, he slammed his laptop to the floor in front of everyone. For him, the rejection went beyond personal failure.
Oh,
Years
no.
later, when I was at Oxford working on my PhD, I heard about a Korean student at my college, Chongnak Park, who took his own life in our dorm after failing his doctoral defense. He had been told his thesis wasn't good enough, and just like those scholars centuries ago, his death wasn't about failure alone. It was about the unbearable shame of letting down everyone who had supported and
no.
believed in him. This mindset extends far beyond academics. In work culture, the grind doesn't end once a student gets into Sky. They find themselves tolerating toxic bosses just to hold on to prestigious corporate jobs. In the entertainment world, idle trainees live under relentless schedules, training vocals and choreography from 12 to 16 hours a day,
Jeez.
dieting to dangerous extremes, and living in dorms under constant surveillance. Most never debut, and even the ones who make it often face contracts that control their weight, their friendships, and even their dating lives, all for the slim chance of standing on stage.
This is bad.
This is bad.
And in gaming, it's no different. You've got players spamming 14 and even 16 solo queue games a day, grinding LP until they burn out.
Oh,
Losing
wow.
streaks tilt them into frustration, but they keep pushing and chasing that razor-thin chance of breaking into Challenger, the top rank in league where only about 0.1% of players ever make it. And the thread running through all of this is a tense balance between raw individual ambition and the shadow of collectivism.
I don't
The
think I'm
idea
gonna...
that the group's on
I mean, I was thinking about playing League, but a lot of people are saying I shouldn't because it like consumes you or whatever, so I
there
don't think
rises
I'm gonna
or
try
falls
it.
with each person in it. And on the surface, Korea runs on a balls to the wall mentality where individuals chase success at all costs. But in the background, that collectivist shadow lingers. When you fall short, you don't just disappoint yourself.
Yeah.
You drag your family, your school, and even your community down with you. And in Korea, that double pressure weighs heavier than in almost any other modern society. And when the pressure cracks your mental health, it's difficult to frame it as medical attention because it's seen as a weakness or even framed as a moral failure. So if you have depression, many will just tell you to, hey, just be happier. If you have anxiety, they'll tell you, just stop being so nervous. And if you
Oh
want to
my
improve in
God.
gaming, the common advice is a simple, get good. And when failure
Jesus.
brings shame, it makes you feel like a burden. Modern psychology calls this one of the clearest pathways.
I was depressed at one point, and I think it was like freshman year I didn't know that I was depressed, but like I was just like really confused. And then I went online and I kind of like I was online and I was on TikTok, and they were like, "Oh, you're just depressed." Because I looked up my symptoms, and I was still depressed for like a really, really long time. And then one day randomly I just woke up and I was just happy. I don't know what I did or what changed, but I was just happier, and I haven't been depressed since. I don't know why I was, or like how I got
To
depressed.
suicidal
But
desire. And tech has only made it worse. Social media creates permanent records of
it
failure.
felt like I was out of my body.
Cyberbullying turns private struggles into public humiliation. And in Korea, internet access and gaming accounts are tied to your real name through your phone number or ID. Even if a social media app doesn't ask you for your ID directly, the system can still trace things back to you. So one online mistake, a cruel rumor, a bad clip, a careless comment, can stick to your name and follow you forever, bleeding into school, work, and even family life. In
Oh, wow.
Korea, entertainers aren't just performers, they're expected to be moral role models. A single scandal, such as drugs, infidelity, and even just rumors, can erase years of
That's
hard work
crazy.
overnight. In this culture, your struggles don't just belong to you. It brings shame
They
to your
belong to
family, your
everyone.
fans who supported you, and even your entire company. And to be clear, not everyone buys into this collectivist honor idea. I've met students and friends who shrugged off these expectations and said, forget the whole honor thing. That's sometimes just a Western stereotype of Asians. So I want to be clear, culture sets the stage, but individuals still have a choice, especially those who are more westernized or independent in nature. Still, the honor system creates the psychological foundation, but a modern economic tsunami hit the nation and turned cultural pressures into a national crisis.
The storm, from war to wealth to the IMF.
Korea's
crash.
rise is often called a miracle, and in many ways it was. In 1953, after the Korean War, the country was in ruins. Per capita income barely scraped past
Ooh.
$67, putting Korea on par with or even below the poorest African countries at the time. Most families farmed just to survive. But by the 1980s and the 1990s, the miracle on the Han River had transformed Korea into a global powerhouse as one of the 4 Asian tigers. Seoul's skyline lit up with skyscrapers and tech companies as new middle class surged to life. For decades, the GDP grew at over 8% a year, and today, it's the world's 12th largest economy. But even in those pre-1997 glory years, world's
Wait, what's the
12th largest.
second? Oh, China, United States, that's crazy. Whoa, that's crazy. Oh, I thought Japan was gonna be higher.
Largest economy. But even in those pre-1997 glory years, cracks were forming. Rapid industrialization and urbanization brought inequality and a brutal focus on status. Material wealth became the yardstick of success. Then came 1997. The IMF crisis hit like an earthquake, and there's way too much to cover here. So here's the quick version. Asian economies collapsed under heavy debt, and currency speculation, forcing South Korea to accept a $58 billion bailout, which is the largest in IMF history at the time. But that lifeline came with strings attached: heavy restructuring, mass layoffs, and sudden collapse of lifetime job security that millions of Koreans had trusted. Companies fell apart, and people who studied hard and landed prestigious jobs suddenly found themselves unemployed and humiliated. And inevitably, suicide rates spiked immediately.
Yeah.
The old promise that hard work would lead to stability was broken. Secure jobs turned into short-term contracts, and young people had to fight harder for fewer opportunities, while aging parents were left alone. A country that had risen from poverty to wealth suddenly saw its foundations shaken.
South Korea's been engulfed by a storm over working hours, and the world's paying attention to a Korean culture of death by overwork, and what looks like a battle between business interests and those who've been fighting to achieve work-life balance.
And out of the wreckage of the IMF crisis, modern social problems dug their roots deeper. Education pressure soared because going to a top school felt like the only ticket to stability. Work stress became the norm, with companies demanding crazy
because then you have to work harder, and then you have to get into the school, and then you have to work even harder to get another job.
Hours as proof of loyalty. Meanwhile, mental health services stayed underfunded, and the stigma of asking for help kept many Koreans from reaching out. Fast forward a decade later, the 2008 global financial crisis brought another shock, but by then, the damage was already baked in. Korea had turned into a dog-eat-dog society where people compete desperately for shrinking opportunities, all while the traditional safety nets of family and community lay in ruins. What emerged was a uniquely toxic environment. Success became measured in test scores, job titles, and paychecks. On the other hand, failure wasn't just personal disappointment. It meant you let your family down and have become a burden. And I say this with a lot of empathy because if you're not helping, it's easy to feel like dead weight during your most vulnerable moments. In the end, Korea's rise created a paradox. The very success that made it a model for development also planted the seeds of a mental health crisis. But Korea isn't the only country that modernized at a breakneck speed. Japan, China, Singapore all went through their own economic booms and financial shocks. So why does Korea stand out with the highest suicide rate among them all?
Yeah. Why Korea stands alone.
What sets Korea apart from its neighbors is a rare combination of factors that collided into a perfect psychological storm. Take China.
Old culture, old ideology, old customs, old traditions, all of the olds must be destroyed.
Compared to Korea, a lot of the roots of traditional Chinese culture was yanked out during the Cultural Revolution. From 1966 to 1976, many traditional norms, such as family hierarchy, honor codes, and obligations, were labeled feudal and torn apart. In their place, the state pushed communist ethics, such as loyalty to the party, the state over the family, and gender equality at work. On the other hand, South Korea carried its Confucian norms straight through modernization, and in some ways leaned into it even harder. Part of that was deliberate. South Korea needed to define itself against the communist North, which had copied China's playbook and stripped away a lot of the tradition. By doubling down on Confucian values and capitalism, South Korea set itself as different from the North. The same shame culture never disappeared. It simply reshaped itself inside modern schools, corporate ladders, and now digital platforms. Now let's compare it to Japan. Its society had over a century to adjust, starting with the Meiji Restoration in 1868, where it had to say goodbye to the old samurai caste system and modernize the economy. The Bushido values of honor and shame didn't disappear entirely, but they were reshaped and later diluted after World War II. By the time Japan had rebuilt, company loyalty and neighborhood ties gave people stability as society modernized. That slower pace of change and those social anchors softened the shocks.
Okay, so that's the difference. Korea was too quick to like break apart like communities, and but Japan was like slower in it.
Korea had no such buffer. Its modernization was so compressed that society never had a chance to catch its breath. For decades after South Korea became a country after the Korean War, Japan actually had the higher suicide rate. But when the IMF crisis hit Korea in the late 1990s, the shock pushed its numbers past Japan's, and Korea has never looked back since. And then there's the trauma of division. No other modern country lives with a hostile twin just across the border. Korea was first divided at the 38th parallel in 1945, but people could still move between north and south for a few years. That all changed after the Korean War. When the fighting ended in 1953 with a ceasefire, not a peace treaty, so the war is technically still ongoing, the borders suddenly slammed shut. Families who had been separated during the war were suddenly cut off permanently, and they've remained divided for more than 70 years. And that sudden separation doesn't just hurt one generation, it ripples forward. A young girl whose mother was trapped in the north grows up without a role model. And when she becomes a parent herself, she may struggle to know how to be a mother. That pain passes on, shaping their children and their children after that. The division creates a cycle of loss that echoes through families, even decades later. The Korean War remains one of the longest ongoing war of this modern era. This tension seeps into daily life, and something like mandatory military service is a constant reminder of that reality. Even global superstars like BTS had to go on hiatus, so all the members could enlist.
They're back now,
Ordinary
by the
people
way.
feel it too, through air raid drills and news flashes about North Korean missiles. And even when I was living there, I heard it on a regular basis. It's always there, simmering just below the surface, ready to flare up into a fire that could burn out of control at any moment. Korea didn't face just one of these challenges. It faced all of them at once. That's why it isn't just another mental health crisis, it's a systemic cultural storm.
Conclusion.
When you put all this together, it's clear that Korea's suicide crisis can't be solved by therapy sessions or awareness campaigns alone. The roots run much deeper, from post-war modernization and lingering shame culture to the
Generations.
aftershocks of repeated economic collapse. These pressures don't determine anyone's destiny, but they do create a pressure cooker environment that people struggle to navigate. How each person moves through that environment depends on their support networks, their circumstances, and frankly, sometimes it comes down to luck.
Wish me luck.
Korea's story in Durkheim's idea of economic suicide shows the hidden cost of breakneck development. Economic miracles are very expensive if they tear apart the social fabric that holds people together. Progress, without protecting human bonds, can leave you with glittering skylines, high-speed internet, and global pop culture, but also with people who feel isolated, invisible, and desperate. And as I was putting this video together, I kept coming back to how unsatisfying it is to end on a neat, here's the solution. With issues like this, there's not a
There's not
simple
one
one
solution.
size
Yeah, there's
fits
not one
all
solution.
fix. The problem hits multiple levels of society, and every case is different. Social science is good at looking back and spotting the problems, but much weaker at giving clean, easy answers for what to do next, because society is simply dynamic. By the time one reform rolls out, a new problem appears. It's like social whack-a-mole. So I do feel a bit frustrated that I can't sit here and prescribe a clear set of steps that would
Mulan is a
solve
really
this.
good movie.
But I have a deep respect for people working on the front lines of this every day, from mental health professionals and social workers to teachers, pastors, community organizers, and family members quietly holding things together. And I hope all of us, wherever we live, can care a little more for the people around us. Because at the end of the day, what sociology can teach us is that macro level crises are shaped by micro level actions. How we
Interesting.
talk to each other,
Yeah.
how we show up, and how we build or neglect the bonds that hold us together make a huge difference. Because in understanding Korea's struggle, we're also asking a bigger question. What kind of progress is worth the cost? If you want to keep exploring how societies change and what gets
That was a good video. I really did think it was just student stress, but it went way deeper than that.